Some stories stay with you longer than others. This one found me years ago, and I've carried it ever since, the way you carry a song your mother used to hum, or the smell of bread baking on a cold morning. It's a simple story, really, about a woman who had nothing left to trade but her pride, about a man who'd forgotten how to hope, about the small mercies that sometimes find us when we've stopped looking for them. I wrote this for folks like us, those of us who've lived long enough to know that life doesn't hand out easy answers. We've weathered our share of storms. We've buried people we loved. We've learned that kindness, when it comes, often arrives in the quietest ways. So, pull up a chair, pour yourself some coffee. Let me tell you about Maribel Hayes and the day she walked into a bakery with nothing but her hair to sell. The bread smelled like something she used to know. Sourdough. That sour, sweet tang of wild yeast rising, mingling with the warmth of a wood-fired oven. It drifted through the gap under the door of Pritchard's Bakery and wrapped around Maribel Hayes like a memory she couldn't quite place. She stood on the wooden sidewalk, fingers curled inside her coat pockets. Empty. She'd checked 3 times already. 2 pennies, worn smooth from handling. The bread cost 5. Through the window glass, smudged with flour dust and fingerprints, she could see the loaves lined up in wicker baskets. Golden brown crusts. Steam curling up from the one Mrs. Pritchard had just pulled from the back, still singing with heat. Maribel's stomach twisted a slow, ringing ache she'd learned to ignore years ago. A fly buzzed against the window. Somewhere down the street, a horse stamped and snorted. Normal sounds. Ordinary morning in an ordinary town. She looked down at her hands, chapped from cold water and lye soap, nails cracked short, nothing there worth trading. Her fingers moved to the back of her neck without her telling them to, found the braid, thick, heavy, brown as chestnuts in October. She'd kept it long because, well, she couldn't remember why anymore. Habit, maybe, or stubbornness, or the last thread tying her to whoever she'd been before all this. The ribbon was old, yellow once, now faded to the color of weak tea, frayed at both ends. She untied it slowly, the silk catching on her roughened fingers, wound it around her wrist, pulled the braid over her shoulder. Heavy. Still worth something. Probably. Hair like this fetched a fair price for wigs and hairpieces back east. She'd heard that somewhere. Couldn't remember where. Didn't matter. She pushed open the door. The bell above it rang out bright, cheerful, the kind of sound that belonged in a happier story. The smell hit her full in the face now. Yeast and molasses and something sweet, maybe cinnamon, baked into the wood of the walls after years of pies and pastries. Her mouth watered. Her hands trembled. Just a little. Mrs. Pritchard looked up from behind the counter, gray hair pinned tight under a white cap, flour dusted across her apron like snow. She smiled the way shopkeepers smile at strangers polite, measuring, waiting to see what kind of customer this would be. "Help you, Miss—" Maribel walked to the counter. Her boots sounded too loud on the plank floor. Thud, 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 like a heartbeat, like a funeral drum. She stopped in front of the bread basket, close enough to feel the warmth rising from the loaves, close enough to see the cracks in the golden crust where the steam had escaped. She didn't let herself look at them. Not directly. Instead, she reached up with both hands, took the braid, and laid it on the counter. Right there, next to the sourdough. The hair coiled like a sleeping snake, brown and shining where the afternoon light caught it through the dusty window. "This enough for bread, ma'am?" Mrs. Pritchard's mouth fell open. Her hand hovered over the counter, fingers spread, not quite touching the hair. She swallowed. "Miss, I don't—" The bell rang again. Maribel didn't turn around. She heard the door open. felt the cool October air push against her back, smelled leather, old and well-worn, dry grass, tobacco that had been sitting in a pocket for weeks, gone stale and earthy, footsteps, heavy, slow, a man's walk, unhurried, like someone who had nowhere particular to be. He stopped somewhere behind her, close enough that she could feel the space he filled, close enough that the air felt different, thicker, charged with something she couldn't name. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes moved past Maribel's shoulder. Something changed in her face. Recognition. Maybe relief. Maribel kept her hand on the counter, inches from the braid. She didn't pull it back, didn't cover it, didn't try to explain. Whatever this man saw, he'd seen worse. Everyone who lived out here long enough had. She waited. The silence stretched. 1 breath. 2. The clock on the wall ticked. The fly buzzed against the window, trapped between the glass and the world outside. Then the footsteps moved again, coming closer, and Maribel felt the air shift beside her as the stranger stepped up to the counter. If this story found you at the right moment, I'd be grateful to know where you're reading from today. Sometimes the best part of sharing a tale is knowing we're not listening alone. She didn't look at him, not directly, but she caught enough from the corner of her eye, tall, broad through the shoulders. A faded Stetson pushed back on graying hair. His sleeves were rolled past the elbow, forearms brown from decades of sun, roped with the kind of muscle that came from work, not vanity. His hand came down on the counter, large, calloused. A white scar ran along the back of it, from knuckle to wrist, old and faded, like a story he'd stopped telling years ago. 2 loaves. Martha. His voice was low, unhurried, the voice of a man who'd learned that rushing never helped anything. And whatever she needs. Mrs. Pritchard's eyes flicked between them. Her flour-dusted fingers twisted in her apron. Grant, I don't think she... I heard what she asked. He reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a silver dollar, set it down next to the braid with a soft click that seemed too loud in the quiet shop. Maribel's throat tightened. She knew this part. She'd lived this part a dozen times in a dozen different towns. The part where someone paid, and then the paying back started. Different currency. Same transaction. She opened her mouth to say something she didn't know what. Maybe no, or I don't need charity, or please just let me trade fair, but the man was already moving. His hand slid across the worn wood of the counter. Not toward her. Toward the braid. He picked it up the way someone might pick up a dropped handkerchief, casual, matter of fact, and held it out to her. Keep it. She stared at the hair in his hand. Her hair. The thing she'd been ready to sell 5 minutes ago for 5 cents worth of bread. I'll feed you, he said. His gray eyes met hers. Steady. Tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. That ain't what I'm asking for. Maribel didn't take it. Her arms stayed at her sides. Fingers curled against her palms so tight her nails bit into skin. She could hear Mrs. Pritchard wrapping the loaves in brown paper, the crinkle and fold of it loud in the silence. Could hear the clock ticking. Could smell the bread. So close now. Warm and real and impossible. Why? The word came out flat. Not grateful, not suspicious, just empty, like a cup with nothing left to pour. The man set the braid on the counter in front of her, stepped back. Because you shouldn't have to. He picked up his own bread, tucked it under his arm, and walked toward the door. And Maribel stood there, with bread she hadn't earned, hair she hadn't sold, and a question she couldn't answer: what kind of man gives something away and asks for nothing back? The sunlight hit her face the moment she stepped outside. Bright, sharp. October in Montana had a way of fooling you warm enough to make you forget winter was coming. cold enough in the shadows to remind you it wasn't far off. Maribel squinted against the glare. Her eyes watered. The bread was warm against her ribs where she'd tucked it under her arm, wrapped in brown paper that crinkled with every breath. The man Holloway stood by a buckboard wagon hitched to a bay mare with a white blaze down her nose. He was checking the harness, running his fingers along the leather straps, his back to the door like he already knew she'd follow. Maybe he did. Maybe he'd seen enough hungry women to know how the arithmetic worked. "Name's Holloway," he said without turning around. "Got a spread 5 miles north." Maribel stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. The wood creaked under her worn boots. Her hand found the braid she'd stuffed back over her shoulder, fingers wrapping around it, squeezing once, letting go, squeezing again, still there, still hers. "My housekeeper took off last month." Holloway turned to face her, leaning one shoulder against the wagon. "Her daughter had a baby back in Ohio. Needed tending." A horsefly buzzed past Maribel's ear. She didn't swat at it. "I got 5 hands working the ranch," he continued. His voice was even, unhurried, like he was discussing the weather or the price of feed. "They need feeding. 3 meals a day. The books need keeping 2 supplies. Wages, cattle counts. Nothing fancy, but it's got to be done right." She watched his face. The deep lines around his eyes. The gray stubble on his jaw. The way his mouth stayed flat. Neither smiling nor frowning. Looking for the lie. The angle. The part he wasn't saying out loud. "And that's all. That's all. Room of your own," he added. 30 cents a day. You keep what you earn. 30 cents. $9 a month if she stayed the whole time. More than she'd held in her hands in over a year. More than enough to buy passage somewhere else when the time came. If the time came. And what else? She asked it flat, the way she'd learned to ask. Get the real price on the table before you agreed to anything. Men always wanted something else. Always. The ones who said they didn't were usually the worst. Holloway's expression didn't change. Nothing else. Men always want something else. Mr. Holloway. The words hung between them. Somewhere down the street. A dog barked. A child laughed. A screen door slammed shut. Normal sounds from a normal town, going about its normal business while Maribel stood on a sidewalk trying to decide if this stranger was salvation or just another trap dressed up in better clothes. He uncrossed his arms, took half a step toward her, then stopped, like he'd thought better of it. "I ain't asking you to trust me, miss." His voice dropped, quieter now, but no less steady. "I'm asking if you can cook." The mare stamped her hoof. Dust rose and settled. The sun pressed down on Maribel's shoulders, warm through the thin fabric of her dress. "I can cook?" Holloway nodded. Once. Like that settled everything. Then we got a deal. He walked around to the back of the wagon, checked something in the bed. "Wagon's out back of the general store. Got to pick up some supplies. Then we head north. Be at the ranch before dark." He didn't look back. Didn't check if she was following. Maribel stood there. The bread grew heavier against her ribs. Her fingers found the braid again, twisted it, let it go. She could walk away, find another town, another bakery counter, another stranger who might not be so careful about what he asked for. Or she could get in the wagon. Her feet moved before she'd finished deciding. One step, another. The wooden sidewalk gave way to packed dirt. The smell of horse and leather grew stronger. The buckboard waited in the alley, the bay mare flicking her ears at the flies. Maribel's canvas bag, everything she owned in the world, sat in the wagon bed. She didn't remember putting it there. She grabbed the side rail, pulled herself up. The wood was rough under her palms. Sun warmed. solid. She sat down on the bench, not close to him, not far, just there, and wondered what was waiting 5 miles north and whether she'd have the sense to run if she needed to. The ranch house sat at the end of a dirt road lined with cottonwoods, their leaves gone gold and orange with October. 2 stories, log walls chinked with white clay, a porch wrapped around the front, and smoke curled from a stone chimney at the back, thin and gray against the evening sky. Maribel climbed down from the wagon before Holloway could offer a hand. Her legs ached from the 5-mile ride, every rut and rock in the road still echoing through her bones. Dust covered her dress, her boots, her face. 5 men stood near the barn, watching. She felt their eyes on her as she walked toward the house, curious, measuring. Not hostile, not yet. Holloway led her inside, through a front room with a settee and 2 chairs and a fireplace, cold in the autumn warmth. Down a hallway that smelled of wood polish and something else. Something faded and floral, like lavender that had been pressed between pages years ago. The kitchen opened up before her, bigger than she'd expected. A cast-iron majestic range stood against the far wall, black and gleaming. No rust on the burners. Someone had blacked it recently with stove polish. A long wooden table filled the center of the room, scarred from years of use but scrubbed clean. Shelves lined the walls, jars of preserves catching the last light from the window, tins of coffee, a row of wooden spoons hanging from hooks like soldiers at attention. Maribel stopped in the doorway. Her hand found the frame, fingers pressing into the rough wood. Pantry's through there. Holloway pointed to a door on the left. Flour, sugar, salt, beans. Should be enough to get started. Let me know when you need more. She walked to the stove, ran her palm across the surface. Cool, smooth. Someone had cared for this kitchen. Someone who wasn't here anymore. The pantry door creaked when she opened it. Inside, a flour barrel sat half full, the gold medal label still visible on the side. A crock of sugar with a fitted lid. Coffee beans in a tin that smelled fresh when she lifted the top, dark and earthy. Dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, their scent sharp and green sage. Rosemary, something she couldn't name. She stood there for a long moment, looking at it all, waiting for the trick, the catch, the thing that would make sense of all this. Boys will be hungry around 6, Holloway said from somewhere behind her. I'll send them in. Then his footsteps retreated, and she was alone. Maribel tied her braid up with the faded ribbon, rolled her sleeves past her elbows, found an apron on a hook by the door, white cotton, clean, pressed flat like someone had laid it out expecting her. She put it on. The ties went around her waist twice. The beef was in the icebox, wrapped in cloth. Potatoes in a bin under the table, onions in a basket, carrots with the dirt still clinging to them, fresh from the ground. She worked without thinking. Knife against the cutting board, a steady rhythm that drowned out everything else. Chunks of beef into the pot, oil sizzling, popping. The smell of browning meat filled the kitchen, rich and familiar. The men came in at 6, just like Holloway said. 5 of them, filing through the door one by one. An old man with white hair and skin like cracked leather, old Pete. Someone called him, a younger one with dark hair and careful eyes. Miguel, 2 others she didn't catch the names of, and a boy, maybe 15, who ducked his head when she looked at him. Jimmy. Lord have mercy, old Pete said, settling into a chair with a groan. His knees popped. He bowed his head for a moment, lips moving silently, then looked up with a grin. Someone who can finally cook. Maribel set the pot on the table, ladled stew into tin bowls. Biscuits went on a plate in the center, steam rising from the golden tops. Coffee in the blue enamel pot, black and strong. The men ate, spoons scraped against tin. Chairs creaked on this wooden floor. Someone grunted approval. No one stared at her too long. Holloway didn't come. She waited by the stove, wiping her hands on the apron. Finally walked to the doorway, looked down the dim hall. His voice came from somewhere deeper in the house. "I take mine in the study. Miss Hayes." That night, she found her room at the top of the stairs, small. A narrow bed with a quilt folded at the foot, faded blue and white. Hand-stitched in a pattern she didn't recognize. A washstand with a pitcher and basin. A window that looked out over the barn, where a lantern still burned against the dark. Clean. Quiet. Hers. Maribel closed the door, stood with her back against it, listening. The house settled around her creaks and groans of old wood, the distant lowing of cattle, wind brushing against the glass. Somewhere far off, a whippoorwill called. 3 notes rising into the night. She dragged the chair from the corner, positioned it under the door handle, the way she'd done 100 times in 100 different rooms. Her hand rested on the chair back. She waited. No footsteps in the hall. No knock. No handle turning. Just silence. Maribel stared at the chair for a long moment. Then she pushed it back to the corner, sat down on the bed, and pulled off her boots. The sheets smelled like lavender and sun. She lay down, closed her eyes, and listened for footsteps that never came. 2 weeks settled into a rhythm. Maribel woke before dawn, when the sky was still gray and the rooster in the yard had only just started his first crow. Coffee first, strong and black, brewed in the blue enamel pot, then biscuits in the oven, bacon in the skillet, eggs waiting in a bowl by the stove. The men came at 6:30, ate without much talk, and scattered to their work. She cleaned, she cooked, she kept the kitchen the way a good kitchen ought to be kept. Afternoons belonged to the Ledgers. The books lived in Holloway's study, a room at the back of the house she'd only glimpsed through the doorway. He'd shown her on the 3rd day cattle counts, supply orders, wages owed. The numbers were a mess, columns half-filled, figures smudged or scratched out. Whoever had kept them before hadn't been comfortable with arithmetic. Maribel was, on this particular afternoon. She pushed open the study door, expecting an empty room. Holloway rode out every day to check fences, count heads, do whatever it was ranchers did when the sun was high and the work was waiting. He was sitting in the armchair by the window. Maribel stopped. Her foot caught the edge of the rug, and she stumbled, catching herself on the doorframe. The ledger she carried slipped. She grabbed it before it hit the floor. Holloway looked up from the book in his hands. Reading glasses sat low on his nose, steel-rimmed, catching the light. The room smelled of old tobacco, not fresh smoke, but the ghost of it, sunk into the curtains and the leather chairs. Underneath that, the scent of books, paper and ink and binding glue. Neither of them moved. "Door was open," he said. "Thought you'd be later. I can come back. Stay if you want." He turned a page. "I ain't gonna bite." She stood there for a moment, weighing. The desk was across the room. The door was behind her. 8 steps to one, 3 to the other. She'd counted without meaning to. But he wasn't looking at her. His eyes had already returned to the book. His posture was loose, shoulders relaxed, the way a man sat when he wasn't planning anything except finishing his chapter. Maribel walked to the desk, pulled out the chair, sat down. The ledger opened with a soft creak. She found her place last week's supply order, the column that didn't balance. Her pencil moved across the page, the scratch of lead on paper the only sound. The clock on the wall ticked. An Ansonia. Walnut case. Brass pendulum swinging back and forth behind the glass. The minutes stretched out, long and slow. Holloway's pages turned at long intervals. Maribel's pencil scratched and paused, scratched and paused. Outside, a horse whinnied somewhere near the barn. A hawk cried, high and distant. Her shoulders loosened. She didn't notice it happening. One muscle at a time, slow, like snow melting off a roof in early spring. It was only when she reached for the ink bottle that she realized she'd been sitting for nearly half an hour without once looking at the door. She glanced up. Holloway was watching her. Not staring, just looking. The way someone might watch a bird that had landed on the fence post outside. Curious, careful not to make any sudden moves. Their eyes met through his reading glasses. He nodded. Small, quiet. Then looked back at his book. Maribel's pencil had stopped. She stared at the numbers without seeing them. The silence in the room had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was something else. Something that didn't press against her chest or make her want to run. She finished the column, closed the ledger, stood up. "Good night, Mr. Holloway." He didn't look up. "Where you from?" "Miss Hayes." The question caught her between the desk and the door. Her hand was already on the frame, her body half turned toward the hall. "Somewhere south," she said. "Don't matter much now." She waited. The follow-up always came. "Where exactly what happened? Why'd you leave?" Men asked questions like that when they wanted ammunition for later. Holloway just nodded, turned another page. "Good night, then." Maribel walked down the hall toward the kitchen. Her footsteps sounded loud in the quiet house. The supper dishes were waiting by the basin, and she would wash them the way she did every night. But her hands were shaking, just a little. 14 days, 14 nights. And Grant Holloway hadn't asked her for anything except cooking and numbers. Hadn't knocked on her door. Hadn't looked at her the way men looked when they were calculating what they could take. She stopped at the kitchen doorway, leaned against the frame. Her whole life, she'd been waiting for the price to come due, the cost behind the kindness, the debt that always followed the gift. What would she do if it never came? The envelope appeared on the kitchen table before dawn. Maribel found it when she came down to start the coffee. The house still dark except for the gray light creeping through the windows. Brown paper, her name written across the front in a careful, slanted hand. She picked it up, felt the weight of it. Paper money. Folded inside. Holloway stood in the doorway, hat already on, ready to ride out. The smell of leather and morning cold clung to him. "First month," he said. "Count it if you want." Then he was gone. The back door closed behind him. His boots scraped across the porch, and a moment later she heard the barn door creak open, the soft nicker of a horse greeting its master. Maribel sat down at the table. The envelope lay in her hands, warm from where he'd been holding it. She turned it over, unsealed. He hadn't even licked it closed. Her fingers slid inside, pulled out the bills, greenbacks, worn soft from handling but good. She spread them on the table, counting. $9, 30 cents a day for 30 days. Exactly what he'd promised. She counted again, same number, no shortage, no deduction for room and board. Even though he could have claimed it, no charge for the food she ate or the lamp oil she burned reading at night or the soap she used to wash her face. Just $9. Sitting on the table like it was nothing special. Maribel stared at the money. Her hands lay flat on the worn wood, pressing down like she needed something solid to hold on to. The rooster crowed outside. The clock ticked on the wall. The house settled around her, creaking and groaning the way old houses do. She'd been waiting for this moment, the moment the real price came due. A hand on her shoulder in the dark hallway. A knock at her door after midnight. A look that said more than words ever could. None of it had come. She gathered the bills, folded them carefully, tucked them into her apron pocket, where they pressed against her hip like a question she couldn't answer. The coffee needed making. The biscuits wouldn't bake themselves. Maribel stood up and got to work. That afternoon, the kitchen pump started leaking. Water dripped from the base, pooling on the floor, spreading toward the pantry door in a slow, dark stain. She tried tightening the handle, but it only made it worse. A steady stream now, soaking into the floorboards. Old Pete showed up with a toolbox before she could go looking for help. "Heard you wrestling with that thing from the barn," he said, kneeling down with a grunt. His knees popped like dry kindling. He didn't seem to notice. "Been meaning to fix it for weeks." Maribel stepped back, giving him room to work. "Appreciate it." He pulled out a wrench, the metal dark with age and oil, started working on the fitting under the pump, his gnarled fingers moving slow but sure. The smell of machine oil and old sweat drifted up from him, not unpleasant, just honest. The smell of a man who worked for his living. "You settling in all right, miss?" "Well enough." The wrench turned. Metal groaned against metal. Water hissed, then stopped. Old Pete wiped his hands on his pants, leaving dark streaks on the faded denim. "Grant don't talk much," he said, not looking at her. His eyes stayed on the pump, but his voice had gone soft. "Don't mean he ain't watching out for you." Maribel leaned against the counter, crossed her arms. "I noticed. He wasn't always like this, quiet. I mean..." Pete sat back on his heels, staring at the pipe fitting like he was seeing something else entirely. Somewhere else. Some other time. "Had a wife? Margaret? Sweet woman? Laughed at his jokes even when they weren't funny. Made the best apple pie in 3 counties. The kitchen was very still. Outside, a meadowlark sang its 3-note song. Another answered from somewhere farther off. "And a boy," Pete continued. His voice dropped lower. "Thomas, 7 years old. Used to follow Grant around like a little shadow. Wanted to ride and rope, just like his pa." Maribel's arms tightened across her chest. She didn't say anything. Fever took 'em both. The words came out flat, worn smooth from telling. 3 winters back. Margaret first, then the boy 2 days later. Grant sat with 'em both till the end. Held that little hand till it went cold. The clock ticked. The drip from the pump had stopped, but Maribel could still hear the ghost of it in her ears. "He ain't been the same since." Old Pete gathered his tools, dropped them back into the box with a clatter. "But he's good people. Miss, don't forget that." He stood up, joints cracking, and shuffled toward the door. Paused with his hand on the frame. "Supper smells good," he said. Then he was gone. That night, after the dishes were washed and the lamp turned low, Maribel walked to her window. The moon hung full and bright, casting silver light across the yard. The barn stood dark against the sky. A coyote howled somewhere in the hills, and another answered, their voices rising and falling like a conversation in a language she didn't speak. And there, on the porch below, sat Grant Holloway, alone in the rocking chair. No bottle beside him, no book in his hands, just sitting, staring out at the darkness, the way a man does when he's looking for someone who isn't coming home. The knife slipped on a Tuesday morning. Maribel was chopping onions for the noon meal, eyes watering from the fumes, when the blade caught the edge of the cutting board and skidded sideways. She felt it before she saw it, a hot line across the back of her hand, just below the knuckles. Blood welled up, bright red, fast. It dripped onto the onions, onto the board, onto the flour she'd spread for the biscuits, turning the white powder pink. She grabbed a dish towel, pressed it hard against the cut. The white cotton turned red in seconds, the stains spreading like ink and water. Not deep. She'd had worse, but the blood kept coming, soaking through the cloth, and she couldn't cook one-handed. And the men would be wanting lunch in 2 hours. And she was standing here bleeding all over someone else's kitchen like she didn't know how to hold a knife. Stupid. Careless. The kind of mistake a green girl makes, not a woman who'd been feeding herself since she was 14. The back door opened. Holloway stood in the doorway, hat in hand, dirt on his boots from the morning's work. His eyes went straight to the towel, the blood seeping through. What happened? Knife slipped. Maribel pressed harder. Her face burned. It's nothing. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, took her wrist before she could pull away. His hand was warm, dry. The calluses rough against her skin. She could feel the strength in his grip, not squeezing. Just holding her steady, like he was gentling a spooked animal. Sit down. I said it's nothing. Sit. She sat. The chair scraped against the floor. Holloway pulled another one close, positioned it so he faced her. The first aid tin came down from the shelf above the stove, red cross painted on the dented lid. He unwrapped the towel, looked at the cut. His face didn't change. Needs cleaning. The carbolic acid bit into the wound like fire. Maribel sucked air through her teeth, her free hand gripping the edge of the chair until her knuckles went white. The smell of it filled her nose sharp. Medicinal, the smell of sick rooms and surgeries. Holloway didn't apologize, didn't tell her it would be over soon, just kept working, dabbing at the cut with a cloth soaked in the brown liquid, his movements steady and sure. Hold still. His voice was low, calm, the way a man talks to a horse that's been hurt and doesn't understand why. Maribel held still. The bandage came next. White muslin, wrapped tight around her hand, between her fingers, across her palm. His hands moved like they'd done this 100 times. Practiced. Familiar. Margaret. The fever. He'd sat with her till the end. The thought rose unbidden, and with it something else. A heat in her face that had nothing to do with the carbolic. She was sitting in his kitchen, in his chair, letting him touch her hand like she was someone worth tending to. Like she belonged here. She didn't belong anywhere. He tied off the bandage, tucked the end under, neat and secure. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. Maribel couldn't breathe. The kitchen was too small. The air was too close. She could smell the carbolic, the onions, the coffee from this morning, and underneath it all, him leather and sweat and something warm she had no right to notice. You all right? She opened her mouth. Her throat had closed up. No words came out. What was wrong with her? She'd been touched by men before. Grabbed. Held down. Worse. She knew how to disappear inside herself. Go somewhere far away until it was over. This wasn't that. This was his hand still resting near her wrist. This was the bandage warm against her skin. This was the way he looked at her, not through her, not past her, but at her. Like she was a person. Like she mattered. Miss Hayes. Yes. The word scraped out. I'm fine. Thank you. He stood up, put the chair back where it belonged, returned the tin to its shelf. Keep it dry for a day or two. He picked up his hat from the table. I'll send Jimmy in to help with lunch. The door closed behind him. Maribel sat alone in the kitchen. Blood still spotted the cutting board. The onions had gone brown at the edges. The flour was ruined. Her hand throbbed under the bandage. She pressed it against her chest, feeling the heat of it through her dress. Her eyes stung. Not from the onions. She'd spent years learning not to want things, not to hope, not to let anyone close enough to matter. And now she was sitting in this man's kitchen, wearing his bandage, thinking about the way his hands had felt on her skin. Careful, gentle, like she was something that could break. When had she started wanting to stay? The moon woke her. Maribel opened her eyes to silver light pouring through the window, so bright it looked like dawn, but the house was dark, and the clock on the nightstand said 2 in the morning. She lay still, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the settling of old wood and the distant call of a whippoorwill somewhere in the cottonwoods. Her mouth was dry. She needed water. She pulled her shawl around her shoulders and went downstairs. Barefoot, the floorboards cool and smooth under her feet. The kitchen was dark. She found the pitcher by touch, poured a glass, drank it standing by the sink, through the window. She could see the porch. Grant was sitting in the rocking chair. A bottle stood beside him on the floor. Old Crow. She could read the label in the moonlight, but the cork was still in it. He wasn't drinking, just sitting, staring out at the fields like a man keeping watch over something only he could see. Maribel should have gone back upstairs. Should have left him to his grief, his silence, his ghosts. She walked out onto the porch instead. The screen door creaked. He didn't turn around. Can't sleep neither. His voice was rough, tired. No. There was another chair beside his, a Navajo blanket draped over the back. The colors faded, but the wool still thick. Margaret's chair, the one old Pete had mentioned. Maribel sat down. The wood was smooth under her hands, worn by years of use. Cool now, in the night air. She could imagine another woman sitting here, watching the same moon, listening to the same wind move through the grass. Neither of them spoke. Crickets sang in the darkness. A coyote howled far off, and another answered, their voices braiding together and falling away. The moon hung low and heavy, close enough to touch. Margaret used to sit there, Grant said. Same chair. Maribel didn't say sorry. The word felt small, useless, like trying to patch a hole in a roof with paper. How long since? 3 years? He still wasn't looking at her. Thomas too. Same week. The silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable. Just heavy. The silence of two people who understood that some wounds don't close, no matter how much time passes. Grant reached down, touched the bottle beside his chair. Didn't pick it up. That day in Martha's bakery, he said. The hair. Why? Maribel's hand went to her braid, hanging loose over her shoulder. The night air was cool on her neck. I was an auction girl. The words came out flat, steady, like reading from a bill of sale. Long time ago, different territory. Grant didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't turn to look at her with the pity she'd learned to expect. Sold twice before I was 20, she continued. Different towns, different men, same story. The moon slid behind a thin cloud. The porch went gray. When you ain't got nothing else, she said. You sell what you can. Her voice didn't shake. She wouldn't let it. She'd told pieces of this before, in bits and fragments, to people who used it against her later. This was the first time she'd said it out loud to someone who hadn't asked for anything in return. Grant was quiet for a long moment. The cloud moved. The moonlight came back, silver and cold. And now, Maribel looked out at the fields. The grass was pale in the darkness, bending in waves as the wind moved through it. Now I don't know what I am. Her throat tightened. Just here, I reckon. Grant turned to look at her. Really look. Not at what she'd been, not at what had been done to her. At her face, her eyes. The woman sitting in his dead wife's chair, telling him things she'd never told anyone. You're still here, he said. His voice was low, rough as gravel. That counts for something. She waited for more. The sermon. The comfort. the words men said when they wanted credit for understanding. He looked back at the fields. "You cook a damn good biscuit," he said. "Start there." The laugh came out before she could stop it. Short, surprised, more like a cough than anything real. She pressed her hand to her mouth. Her eyes burned. Grant didn't smile, but something in his face shifted. The hard lines around his mouth eased, just a little, like a fist slowly unclenching. "I ain't gonna pretend I know what you've been through," he said. "I don't, but I know what it's like to wake up and not recognize the person in the mirror." The wind picked up. Maribel pulled her shawl tighter. "After Margaret and Thomas, I didn't leave this ranch for 6 months. Couldn't see the point." He touched the bottle again. Still didn't open it. "Figured I'd just sit here till I joined them. What changed?" "Nothing." He shrugged. Sun kept coming up. Cattle still needed feeding. Pete kept making coffee so bad I couldn't stand it anymore. He glanced at her. "A small thing. Quick. Sometimes you don't get rescued, Miss Hayes. Sometimes you just keep putting one foot in front of the other till the walking gets easier." The whippoorwill called again. 3 notes, rising into the dark. Maribel stood up. The chair creaked behind her. "Mr. Holloway." He looked up. "Thank you," she said, "for not asking me to be grateful." She went inside before he could answer. Climbed the stairs. Lay down on her bed and stared at the ceiling until the moon moved past her window. Something had shifted. Something she'd kept buried for years. She didn't know yet if it was hope or just the memory of what hope used to feel like. Morning came soft through the window. Maribel opened her eyes to pale light and the sound of the rooster crowing in the yard. For a moment, she didn't move, just lay there, feeling the weight of the quilt on her chest, the coolness of the pillow against her cheek. Something was different. She couldn't name it. The room looked the same. The light looked the same. But when she swung her legs over the side of the bed and her feet touched the cold floor, her body felt lighter. Like she'd set down a sack of flour she'd been carrying so long she'd forgotten it was there. She dressed quickly, twisted her hair into a loose braid, went downstairs. The kitchen was cool and quiet, the stove cold from the night. She lit the fire, filled the coffee pot, cracked eggs into the big iron skillet. Bacon went into another pan, the fat sizzling and popping, filling the room with smoke and salt. Biscuits from yesterday's dough, shaped and slid into the oven. The back door opened. Grant stood in the doorway, hat in hand, boots muddy from the morning dew. He smelled like hay and horse and the cold October air. "Morning? Morning?" Their eyes met, held. 1 breath, 2. He didn't look away first. Neither did she. Then he nodded, hung his hat on the peg by the door, and sat down at the table. Maribel poured his coffee, set it in front of him. Their fingers didn't touch, but she felt the warmth of his hand near hers. The space between them felt different now, not empty, not waiting for something bad to happen. Just there, like a door left open on a summer day. The other men filed in one by one, old Pete first, groaning as he lowered himself into his chair. Miguel quiet as always, nodding his thanks. Tom and Hank arguing about a fence post that needed replacing. Jimmy last, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hair sticking up on one side like a rooster's comb. "Miss Hayes," old Pete said, reaching for a biscuit. "You spoil us rotten. You know that." She set a plate of bacon on the table. "Someone's got to." Jimmy looked up, hopeful. "Can we have pie tonight?" Maribel looked at him. 15 years old, skinny as a rail, eyes bright over something as simple as pie. "We'll see." The boy grinned like she'd promised him Christmas. After breakfast, after the dishes were washed and the kitchen swept, Maribel climbed the stairs to her room. She stood in front of the mirror. The woman looking back was thinner than she remembered, older, lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago, but her hair was still long, still brown, still hanging past her shoulders in the braid she'd worn since she was a girl. She picked up the brush from the nightstand, began working through the tangles, one stroke at a time. The bristles pulled gently against her scalp. The motion was familiar, soothing. The memory came unbidden. The bakery, the counter. The braid coiled next to the bread like something she was throwing away. This enough for bread? Ma'am. Her hand stopped mid-stroke. She'd been ready to sell it, trade the last piece of herself for 5 cents worth of food, and a stranger had walked in and handed it back like it was worth keeping. Maybe it was. Her eyes dropped to the dresser. A ribbon lay there that hadn't been there yesterday. Blue silk, the color of a summer sky, folded neatly beside the mirror. She hadn't seen Grant put it there, but she knew. Maribel picked it up. The silk was cool and smooth between her fingers. She lifted it to her nose. It smelled like the general store in town. New, unused. She tied her braid with it, looked at herself in the mirror. The blue looked bright against the brown of her hair. Pretty, like something a woman would wear if she wanted to be seen. She went downstairs. The afternoon passed the way afternoons did now. Bread dough rising on the counter, laundry snapping on the line, the smell of apple pie baking in the oven, cinnamon and sugar and butter browning in the heat. When the light turned gold, Maribel walked out onto the porch. Grant was already there, sitting in his rocking chair, looking out at the fields. The grass had gone amber in the late sun, bending and swaying like water. He didn't turn when the screen door creaked, but he shifted, just slightly, moving his chair a few inches to the left, making room. Maribel sat down in Margaret's chair. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun. She settled back, let her hands rest in her lap. The bandage was off now. The cut nearly healed. Just a thin pink line across her knuckles. They sat in silence. The sun sank lower, painting the fields in shades of honey and amber. A hawk circled overhead, riding the wind, patient and unhurried. Staying through winter. Grant's voice was quiet. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were on the horizon, where the mountains cut a dark line against the fading sky. Maribel watched the hawk turn, felt the wind on her face, cool now, carrying the smell of dry grass and wood smoke from someone's chimney. She thought about the bakery, the bread, the braid on the counter. She thought about the envelope on the kitchen table. $9. A promise kept. She thought about his hands wrapping the bandage, careful, gentle. If you'll have me. He turned then, looked at her. His gray eyes were soft in the evening light. I'd like that. 4 words. That was all. Maribel looked back at the fields. The hawk had landed somewhere out of sight. The first stars were appearing, faint and far away. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Didn't know if this quiet thing between them would grow or fade, or stay exactly as it was. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't afraid to find out. Some stories leave us quiet when they end. Not empty, just still. The way you feel after sitting on a porch at dusk, watching the light fade, not needing to say anything to anyone. This one may have stirred something familiar. Many of us know what it feels like to carry things we never chose to carry, to wonder if kindness always comes with a cost, to hold ourselves at arm's length because getting close once hurt too much. And perhaps some of us also know the strange ache of being truly seen by someone who asked for nothing. How unsettling that can feel. How tender. Maribel's story doesn't wrap up neat with a bow. Neither do most of ours. We just keep going. One morning, then another. One cup of coffee. One biscuit. One ordinary kindness at a time. Until the going feels a little less heavy. It's all right if something in this story sits with you a while. Not everything needs to be understood. Some things are just meant to be held gently. Then set down when you're ready. Thank you for staying to the end. Thank you for listening.